Unit 3, Sensation and Perception.
By Allie Winkler and Ashley Kehoe.
Let's start with sensation. Sensation is the way we represent the world in our head by detecting physical energy from the environment and encoding it as neural signals.
Part of sensation is bottom-up processing. The eye is seeing flowers. This is bottom-up processing. However, when the flowers remind you of your grandma because she always had purple flowers in her house and this makes you happy, you are using top-down processing. This is when we construct perceptions based on our experience and expectations.
Absolute thresholds are the minimum stimulation necessary to detect a particular stimulus, whether it's light, sound, pressure, taste, or odor, 50% of the time. Say you have a clock. The clock might be ticking, but if you are standing 50 feet away, you would not hear it. However, if you are standing 10 feet away, you may be able to hear it. Therefore, 10 feet is your absolute threshold in this experiment. Difference threshold is the minimum difference a person can detect between any two stimuli half the time. If you have 4 M&Ms and one more is added to make 5, you would definitely notice a difference. However, if you have 23 M&Ms and one more is added to make 24, you would not be able to tell a difference. Just like we have to increase our scenario from 4 to 5 M&Ms by 25%, we would have to increase this scenario by approximately 25%. Therefore, 25% is our difference threshold.
Next, we have signal detection theory. This theory considers our experiences, expectations, motivation, and tiredness in predicting how, when, and if a stimulus will be detected. Looking back to the clock, we can talk about how the ticking relates to signal detection. Many factors will contribute to if you hear the faint sound. If you are closer, you will be more likely to hear it than if you are farther. If you are having a conversation with your friend, your attention is shifted and you'll be less likely to hear it. If you had an incredibly annoying clock in your room as a kid that made it hard for you to fall asleep, you might be more sensitive to the ticking. If there is a bunch of people having a conversation in the room, you will not be as likely to hear the noise as if you were alone. All of these situations have an effect on whether you detect the signal or not.
Now let's take a look at sensory adaptation. Have you ever been at the beach, jumped in the ocean, and just stood there shivering because the water was so cold? Well, what about 3 minutes later when the water felt fine and you were urging your friends to get in with you? This is an example of your senses adapting to your surroundings, the cold ocean water.
The next case we'll talk about is processing. There are 2 kinds of processing. Computers use serial processing. They do everything separately through multiple steps. Your brain, however, uses parallel processing, which means it does many things all at once. If you see a basketball moving down a hill, your brain is able to tell that the object is orange, close to you, and rolling, all at the same time. This is parallel processing. Now moving into perception and more specifically perceptual organization. Part of perceptual organization is called Gestalt. Gestalt is the belief that in objects, the whole is greater than the sum of its parts. Take a look at this picture. Are you trying to put the pieces together? I bet you're thinking it's a bunny. That's because for us, the whole bunny is greater than all of its parts together. These are really just shapes. And this is a bunny. Another type of perceptual organization is figure and ground. Have you ever been in the car trying to listen to a song, but your annoying brother is being loud in the back seat and your mom's trying to tell him to be quiet, and then to make it all even worse, there's lots of traffic and horns beeping around you? In this case, what you are trying to focus on is the music, so the music is the figure. All the noise around you, like your annoying brother and the loud traffic, is called the ground. Grouping is another type of perceptual organization, and there are many ways to group. Look at these stars. Do you see them in groups of 4 columns, 3 columns, and another 4 columns? Or do you see them as 11 columns? Your brain wants to see them as 4, 3, and 4, and this is because those columns are closer together. This represents grouping through proximity. There is also grouping through similarity. You probably see this set of stars as 4 rows rather than seeing them as columns. This is because the similar colors of each row affect how your brain processes the set. Closure in objects is another way to group. Our mind prefers closed objects. This green square is most likely more pleasing to the brain than the broken up blue one is. Therefore, you might be trying to mentally close the object so it looks more like this, but that is not how the object actually is. Take a look at this picture. People generally view this as one continuous zigzag line broken up by one horizontal line, instead of up and down triangles like this picture shows. The reason for this is that our brain likes continuous patterns and continuity. The last type of grouping we'll talk about is called connectedness. When lines are added between every two hearts in this row of 6, we tend to see it as 3 groups as opposed to 6 separate hearts. This is because we tend to see things that are connected as being together in a group. Now let's move on to depth perception. This is the ability to judge distance in 3 dimensions. Visual clip is a way to test perception in infants and whether it is learned or innate. There have been many studies where an infant is placed on the opposite side of a plexiglass structure as their mom and are tested to see if they will have a reaction to the change or not. These experiments have often found that in humans, once children have mobility, they express depth perception as well. Binocular cues are ways to judge distance that require the use of both eyes. 2 eyes are needed for these scenarios because the left and right eyes perceive slightly different images, a term called retinal disparity, which often affects how distance is viewed in these cases. When you go to see a 3D movie, the red and blue glasses you use mimic retinal disparity. Therefore, you need both eyes to be able to perceive the 3D film. Convergence is another type of binocular cue. This describes how your eyes turn inward or become cross-eyed when seeing something very close to you. Holding your fingers close together in front of your eyes is an example of convergence. The closer the object, the more convergence there is. Another type of depth perception is monocular cues. Monocular cues only need one eye to judge distance. Relative size is something that can be perceived with only one eye. Because the blue flower in this picture is larger, we perceive it as being closer. The fact that this square is blocking the circle causes us to perceive the square as being in front of the circle. This represents a monocular cue called interposition. Another monocular cue is called clarity. The fuzzy iPhone may appear to be farther away than the clear one, and this is a cue that only requires one eye to notice. Texture gradient is the changing from distinct or coarse texture to more smooth and indistinct textures. The more texture there is, the closer that part of the object appears to be. Relative height shows how the higher objects are, the farther away they seem to be. The moon lower to the horizon appears to be closer, and the moon higher away from the skyline appears to be farther. There is also relative motion. A way you might have experienced this is if you've ever been looking out the side window of a car as it moves. The clouds may seem to move, but really you are the one moving in the car. Linear perspective is another monocular cue. The convergence of parallel lines, like this road, indicates increasingly farther distance. We can tell that this girl is far down the road because of the convergence of lines. The last monocular cue that we'll look at is called light and shadow. If something is lighter, it's perceived to be closer. Think of a sphere. The brighter part where the light reflects is usually considered closer than the shadowy sides and bottom. Next, we'll take a look at motion perception. Think about how you view enlarging objects as approaching you instead of growing. This is an example of how you perceive motion. A type of motion perception is known as the 5 phenomenon. Look at these Christmas lights. The light appears to be moving, but really each bulb is just switching on and off. Perceptual constancy describes how we perceive actual objects as unchanging, even if other stimuli are changed. Shape, distance, light, and size might affect an object, but we will not think of it as a completely different object. Here we can see an example of size constancy. We know and perceive that the girl's size is unchanging, even though the plants around her make her appear to be either larger or smaller. Perceptual adaptation is the ability of vision to adjust to displacement. After putting on a new pair of glasses with a different prescription, objects may appear to be fuzzy, but after a while, your vision will adjust and be able to see the object clearly. Last but not least, we have perceptual set. Perceptual set refers to how our predispositions caused by experiences, assumptions, and expectations cause us to perceive objects or scenarios. If you see a sweet, innocent-looking girl about to sing, there are definitely many assumptions and expectations you have of what is to come out of her mouth. If the young, innocent-looking girl begins to sing explicit rap music, you will definitely be surprised. This is an example of how your perceptual set is working. Thanks for watching our video on Unit 3, Sensation and Perception.